most of what people hear about death and dying is scary and negative. And actually, the vast majority of death that I have been present at has been expected and peaceful and gentle. Not perfect, because it never is, but it's not been scary. What we see on film and TVs is not how it often is. A gentle, quiet, peaceful death isn't a big story. You know, if you went back 100, even 80 years, then most people would have died in the home. They would have seen a dead body. There'd be someone down the road, like an elder kind of person you would call on, same you would with a birth, you know, you've done this before, can you come and help us? We're almost trying to work ourselves out of a role. Ideally, you wouldn't even need an end-of-life doula, because people on every street, every neighbourhood, every community group would just know and understand how to support people with death and dying. Funerals and rituals are for the people left behind. It's for their grief. It's for them to have some way of honouring somebody. And I think as humans, we really need that.
Welcome to the podcast, Death, a Changing Industry. Today, with a great pleasure to welcome the CEO of End of Life Doula UK, Dr Emma Clare. Emma, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And really looking forward to learning about the work that you do. So firstly then, could you start by sharing what led you into the incredible and meaningful, but often misunderstood work of the End of Life Doula, please?
Yeah, sure. I think like many doulas, I fell into the work. It wasn't a plan I had early on, but my background's psychology. So I did my undergrad in psychology, and then I was just looking for a role working with people, and I started doing home care. So the classic driving around 15 minutes with each person, not much time to do anything meaningful. And through that, I noticed the difference good communication between families and the person who was dying and healthcare professionals made. And at that stage, I was quite interested in finding a role that was about improving that communication. But then I found the End of Life Doula Foundation training, and I just thought I'd do it for my own personal interest, really. But like many doulas, did it and just got really hooked on being in a room with people who can just talk about this openly.
Yeah. And
carried on from there. And as soon as I'd done that training, one of my friends saw that I'd done it on social media, and sadly their dad was dying at the time, and said, will you come to the hospital and speak to my family? And I was very honest and said, I've only done a couple of days of this, but I'll come and see if I can be any help. So I didn't even really intend to start doing the role as early as I did, but it just carried on from there, really. And I think the other thing that got me into this work is I grew up with my mum and her parents and my grandparents, and they were very open about talking about death and dying. And I think even from a young age, I was quite aware that they were older, than everybody other's kind of parent figures. And my granddad in particular was very good at talking about death as part of nature. So we would often find dead birds and look at them together. We bred birds, and it was just a really normal thing we talked about, appreciating the natural cycles of life. So I think that also helped me get into this work and be comfortable with it.
It's fascinating, isn't it, actually, because like you say, it's part of who we are, it's our nature, but still we have a detachment within society around this. From a young person, like your family showing you like the animals and how things come to an end, has that helped you with your life moving forward as well? More of an understanding and appreciation, do you think?
Well, from my doula work, I think I've found that a lot of people find that appreciation quite late on, sadly. Sometimes it takes, a diagnosis to know that time is short to make you more mindful of appreciating the things around you. And I think I had that instilled in me from a really young age, and I feel grateful that I've lived that way. I mean, obviously people have different beliefs, but mine is certainly around just being part of nature. I will go back to nature. And so it's and through the doula work, it's made me more mindful of appreciating things around me, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's interesting. It's a shame as well that we have to have a diagnosis, a terminal illness, to start living our true lives. But anyway, let's move forward. So people watching this or listening to this, they still might be quite confused about what a death doula or doula does in the UK. And how does that compare to the service and support provided by a hospice or palliative care? Could you explain, please?
Yeah, of course. So it's quite hard to sum up the doula role in a sentence, and that's because the whole point of it, what makes it unique, is the flexibility of it and how it looks very different and how it changes over time as well. So if you were going to sum it up, it's always a mix of practical and emotional support, and very often spiritual support as well. And I don't necessarily mean religious support. Spirituality can mean different things to different people. But we talk about how the majority of death and dying happens away from formal services. People are in front of, a palliative care service, their doctor, for around 5% of the time in that end-of-life care journey. And we work in that other part, which is mainly in people's communities. So as a doula, we're not saying we're experts, we're just saying we are another person in that community who has complete comfort and knowledge and understanding around what ordinary dying looks like. And I think it can be quite challenging to healthcare professionals working in other services, and talking as a previous carer myself when I did home care, because I think a lot of people go into healthcare roles because they want to have the time to do these things with people, to have meaningful conversations with people. And at the minute, sadly, the system is quite restrictive of that. So as doulas, many of us have come out of that system ourselves, because we have the luxury of time in this role. And I think, and we can also have the continuity in that we will very often stay and support family and friends after the person's died as well.
So to unpick this then, because my brain's buzzing. So at the moment, like NHS, and I'm not, again, putting a broad brush across this, but the word care, so we say like our sort of more traditional methods and the environments where someone dies, it's more clinical to a certain degree. There's more of a process involved. And like what you've said there, people go into these roles for the care, but because the time is limited, you're almost restricted in what you can do. So, and that's why you're saying you have to adapt to what you do, because everyone is unique, and therefore you meet the needs of each individual.
Yeah, and I'm not for a second saying that other services don't do person-centred care. Some do it better than others, but yeah. I do think what makes us different is the compassionate community nature of the role, because actually I think we're almost trying to work ourselves out of a role. Ideally, you wouldn't even need an end-of-life doula, because people on every street, every neighbourhood, every community group would just know and understand how to support people with death and dying. But for now, we are where we are. And so a lot of what we do is creating and pulling in that circle of support around a person. And I know when we have worked in some areas very closely with NHS services, we've had feedback to say how helpful it's been to know that doulas can go and fill those gaps and to do those things that they can see need doing, but it's either not within their remit or they haven't got the time to do it. So we often talk about filling the gaps in existing support, which obviously look different for everybody.
You mentioned as well about the gaps. So obviously from NHS there can be gaps, but also society, we have big gaps. So death still being the taboo that it is in the Western world, in your experience, how does having the conversations at different stages around death, around dying, around bereavement, around grief, how can it help us move forward in society?
I think there is a perception of it being kind of a taboo subject, but I also think at the same time that if you create the right spaces, people do want to talk about this. We often hear as doulas that people just need sometimes somebody neutral outside of their family to talk about their fears, or a common example is perhaps people are actually quite accepting of the fact they're dying, but they feel like saying that to their relatives sounds like they're giving up on them, or so having those spaces like death cafes. As doulas, we will often hold death cafes, spaces that reduce the isolation and the shame around death and dying and grief as well. And then thinking about death anxiety. So my other kind of hat is as a psychologist, and my research was in death anxiety. And like any kind of anxiety, really, the more exposure you have to something, usually the the more the fear reduces.
Yes.
So just allowing people to approach the topic of death and dying in whatever way is easiest for them. You know, maybe before they start talking about it, they need to do something creative, or you know, something collectively. Maybe they need to walk with other people who are in a similar position to them. And I think all of those things can lead to transformation. Like at the beginning, I was talking about how it can be quite sad that it's often a terminal diagnosis that makes people find the meaning in life and to live authentically.
Yeah.
And I think we can all do that, because in a sense we're all dying and we can do that now. You know, we can live more consciously. We can it's definitely, working with people who are dying definitely makes me more likely to focus on things that I actually want to do, that I actually care about. I feel like I say no to things much easier if, you know, I'm constantly thinking I have this limited time that I need to spend well. And people can think, oh, that sounds stressful and morbid, but actually I think it makes life brighter. Someone I supported once said that their diagnosis had made everything more colourful, and I really liked that. I think that's true.
No, it's you saying that excites me, because like I have the same sort of view, like a sand timer behind me, and that's not morbid. It's like you respect yourself more. Like you say, you can say no to things with ease, because like you know, limited time. We all have that, and also you mentioned about fear. The unknown creates the fear. I've got an example where a lady in this area where I serve, her father was murdered, and she came to see me 6 months afterwards, and she was struggling to process the death of her dad, as expected. He'd been murdered, and she was from Cornwall, and she said, "Can I come and have a cup of tea with you when I'm next up in the area?" I said, "Yes, certainly." So I had a cup of tea with her, and she was just saying that time was like a blur almost. And I said, "Well, would it help you to show you the room where your dad was, the chapel arrest? It's now empty." She said, "I'm allowed to." I said, "Of course you are." So I showed her the room, and it really helped her. She said, "Oh, wow, this is, I remember now." And then I said to her, "Would it be helpful to show you the mortuary space where your dad was brought back into?" And again, she was like, "Am I allowed to?" I said, "Of course you are." So we went straight up there, and she was like, "Oh, wow, I didn't expect this." And I was witnessing the unknowns were being cleared up, and then the fear was gone. I ended up showing her the workshop where the same coffin I showed her dad had, and these are the handles we had on the coffin. And it was amazing how it proved the theory that if we remove the unknown, the fear disappears. So like, what other things can we do, or those people who are anxious about dying, they're scared of death, what can we do to sort of show them that there is another way and that our mindset isn't morbid? Yes.
Oh, great question. I think there's a few things. So what you did, obviously there's always the big unknown about death that we can never get rid of. So that part will always, as humans, we are not good with uncertainty. You know, we want to know what things will look like and what they will be. And the fact that we don't know exactly when we're going to die, how it's going to be, whether there's anything after, some people would say that is always going to be like that. But what we can do is reduce the other uncertainty. So just like your example there, as doulas, we would do that around talking the person through what bodily changes they might go through, and the family too. Physical changes, yeah. And nobody yet that I've supported has said no when I've offered, you know, would you like talking through what we often see, what you might expect to experience, and here's the things that we can put in place as backup, you know, if you need any support around those things. But most of the time people are just relieved to know that dying generally, obviously we're talking about expected dying here, generally follows a process that we can recognise and that's normal, and that, you know, there's slight changes for everybody. But I think it's so much less stressful because it's already upsetting watching a, you know, relative coming to the end of their life, that if people are watching it and thinking, oh, is this normal? You know, things change so much every day, by the hour even, and it's so much more stressful. And you have people then, you know, ringing the doctor, sometimes ringing 999, this is happening, is this normal? And instead, if they can say, okay, it might still be unpleasant, but we remember that we were told this is what to expect. And for the person themselves, because and it's not their fault at all, but the people around the person dying are creating the atmosphere in the room, aren't they? And if people are extremely stressed and anxious, then people can feel that.
Yeah. And often it spreads.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think it's helpful all round. If you can, anything you can reduce the uncertainty about, I think that's really helpful.
And I think the key word here is calmness. And that's what you create, a calm space.
Yep.
The thought of me dying in my bed, the time has come and everyone around me is like panicking and like, literally, what's happening? It's like, just everyone, just chill out. So, yeah, I love the thought of that. I hate chaos.
Yes.
I hate chaos. So the thought of like creating calmness, it's so important. And again, another example for you, I've had phone calls late in the evening from a family or families to report that their loved one has died, their person has died, and can you now come to move them, transfer them into your care? So that's fine. When do you want us to come? And they would say, well, actually, you need to come now. I said, well, we don't have to come now. And they had been told by the doctor's told them that before the doctor leaves, you must call the funeral directors and they will come and collect the person that's died. And I'm just thinking it's such a shame because that communication is so critical. You've got a person with authority and respect, a respected position and title there in a prime position to create calmness. And they're doing the opposite. They're saying now, you need to call them now. Oh, okay, suddenly your person's been dying for months in this room and then suddenly within the hour they've gone. What a missed opportunity for calmness and for healing to move forward with your grief and bereavements. Yeah. And then suddenly that they've gone, they've disappeared, they've gone within an hour or two. I just think the education needs to go out there, and that's what I want us to do with the podcast as well, is so people have that informed information, and that's what you're doing as well, isn't it? So
yeah, I love that you were giving those examples to say we tell people, we give people permission and we let people know they have choice around these things, because I do think a big part of it is that people just don't know they have any choice. They think, like you say, there has to be a rush. The first thing I would say when I'm supporting a family, sometimes I did it for my own family as well, write a note that is, when the time comes, when they've died, just read this in case you need to know what to do next. And the first thing is always, there is no rush at all. Sometimes there's something you do need to do promptly. Maybe if somebody's, my granddad had wanted to donate his body to medical science and you might have to make a phone call in the first half an hour, that kind of thing. But in terms of keeping somebody at home, and I think it's a real shame, especially if family and friends have done a really good job of pulling together through those final days, creating a calm environment to then bring rush into the immediacy after somebody's died, when I think it really helps people's grief to sit with the person. And we often hear, if people do have that time to sit with them, they say things like, okay, I feel like he's gone now. But if people are rushed away too quickly, people don't feel like that. That's still your
control.
Yes.
They lose the control.
Exactly.
And that example I gave you, the person who died actually ended up staying the whole night at home. I told them, don't plan to call me at a specific time. Call me tomorrow when you're ready.
Yes.
If it's 2 a.m, that's fine. And they called me about 10 o'clock and they said, actually, John, 10 a.m, John, we're now ready. So they had the control.
Yes.
So they had the calmness and the control. And I think that's the two key areas, really, when it's turmoil, isn't it? That's what we all need.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's so much better.
No, great. Well, so a fascinating question for you is, what are some of the most powerful moments you've witnessed where individuals or families have found peace or even purpose through the dying process?
I feel that's definitely one of the hardest questions. The first thing it makes me think of is that I know it's interesting for people to have like a profound moment, but that it's always messy. It's always messy humanness. Yeah. And even when there's something like a glimmer that you think, oh, that went really well, or that was really profound, it's usually mixed in with just the ordinariness and the chaos sometimes of everything else. But probably my favourite situations, obviously not going into too much detail, are where families have really pulled together around that shared purpose of giving their usually parent the best end of life possible. You know, maybe there's disagreements going on in the family, really challenging relationship dynamics. Sometimes people haven't spoken for many years, but they can come together around that shared purpose. And I think that's definitely when I find the doula role most rewarding. I think as doulas we gravitate towards different situations depending on what our strengths are and sometimes what our background is come into this role. And with mine being psychology, you know, I actually quite like working with the whole family unit groups when things are quite messy, you know, helping people get on the same page, helping people to just park things that we're not going to fix now, but what we can do is park that so we can support your dad or whoever for the time being. And the other thing that I really like is around again, and it's a shame people sometimes leave it this long, but when a death really brings a community together. And sometimes it's really nice when, as a doula, you just find you need to blend into the wallpaper and you're not, you know, sneak out the room and do the washing up. You're not actually needed because that circle has shown up when they really needed to show up. And they're being held by the community now. And it's a conversation I'll often have with doulas who are new to the role, because when you have that first conversation with people, they are often in chaos, like you say. And that people will often say, can you be here 24/7? Can we ring you in the night? Can you? And obviously, yes, I would go if somebody rang me. But most of the time, by the time that time has arrived, they're like, do you know what? We're actually okay. Can I just have you on the end of the phone?
Yeah.
And that's when you know
the thought of you being there, though, is enough.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And I think it keeps coming back to on this podcast, like community connection. And that's what we need. That's what heals. That's how we move forward. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking like the word that for me is success almost. Like I was said on the previous podcast with Nicola Marshall, I spoke to her about a lady I met in Vietnam, and she spoke, the keynote speaker in Vietnam, about what is the purpose of life, and people put down different answers, being kind, treating people well, but her answer was to die well. And it's like quite profound, and it keeps going back to that. But it's connection, it's community, it's positive environments as much as it can be. Mm-hmm. And that's like if it's traumatic death or if it's peaceful, like we all kind of wish for, or I hope for, everyone's around the bed saying goodbye. But actually, that isn't the real world, is it? That isn't life. So actually, to move forward in a direction where our environments are as peaceful as possible, working towards that, I think it's a really healthy thing. So, thank you. So you work with people at the end of their lives, but you do also see your role as supporting the living in how they process death, grief, and legacy. How does that work?
Yeah, I like this question because I think when you say you're an end of life, you definitely get funny looks, but people also, like I said before, just assume it's a really miserable job, and actually most of the work, like yours as well, is about living and helping people live right up to the end. And for the people around the person as well. So thinking about grief, anticipatory grief, helping people to plan ahead when they're well. We don't always support people who have a terminal diagnosis. It might be just people that want to get their affairs in order, which is a great thing to do as early as possible. But a big thing I think we do as doulas around death, grief and legacy is changing the narrative about it, because we're not trying to positive wash death and say it's always lovely and gentle, because of course it isn't. But the stories we tend to hear in our communities and what we see on film and TVs is not how it often is. Because a gentle, quiet, peaceful death isn't a big story, And I think at the minute it's the wrong way round, in that, of course, people should talk about it if they have had a traumatic experience, but one of the places I learned a lot about death and dying was just when I worked in a pub, and you hear those conversations, at the bar or
life.
People, just over a pint about, so you can hear when you're working somebody's had a bereavement, and the difference that changing the narrative around that, back to, I keep using the phrase ordinary dying, which is something I've got off Dr Catherine Mannix, but I think it's so important to just tell stories, realistic stories of when death has been gentle and just ordinary, and and talk about those times equally or as much as, you know, the bad experiences, because I think at the minute it just feeds, we've already got that fear of the unknown, and at the minute most of what people hear about death and dying is scary and negative. And actually I can definitely say for myself, and I think most other doulas would probably have had similar experiences, that the vast majority of death that I have been present at, or, you know, I've been on the end of the phone for, has been expected and peaceful and gentle. Not perfect, because it never is, but it's not been scary.
Hey guys, thank you for watching the video so far. I hope you're really enjoying it. Please click the thumbs up on the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, a huge thank you to our sponsors. Their details are found in the video description just below. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating because this has made me think about my experience of my mum dying, and I was so fortunate that I was with her throughout, and it was peaceful, it was calm, we had time, and I'm really grateful for that. And I always think back to like me being able to talk to her and like whisper in her ear that things would be okay, and it's okay to go.
Yes.
So at the time, being 12 years old, I didn't realise how lucky I was to have that space. Mm-hmm. So fortunate. And I meet so many people now who aren't fortunate to have that space, where it happens traumatically or they didn't get to hospital in time.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a, I know what it can be. Mm-hmm. I know that's not life. Life isn't as kind to give us that opportunity that I had, but it makes me realise even more how lucky I was at that time with my mum. So thank you for reminding me.
Thanks for sharing that. And as a child to have that as well, that's a big thing to be allowed that space. Yeah, and to be honest with you, like looking back at it even more, I remember she was having like a build-up of fluid in her legs because she had cancer and the medication that she was on. I remember like for like hours before she died, I'll be like just rubbing her feet to try and like help the swelling. Mm-hmm. And so like, again, like these things, it's beautiful really. And some people go, who's 12 years old? They shouldn't be doing that. It's my mum. She's my mum. Absolutely. But I want to be here with her, you know, protecting her, looking after her, and having the opportunity to say to her, things will be okay, mum. Mm-hmm. It's okay to go. And being able to do something, I wish I could attribute the quote, but somebody said recently that grief is an emotion that needs something to do, like having a task, you know, the same when people have just died and you help them, you know, gently wash or dress the person, then it just feels so much better for people, I think, when they feel like they're doing something meaningful. Yeah. We had a lady whose son, he died by taking his own life. And I arranged the funeral in our facility in Bridgnorth, and I could see her mum when she came in was just trauma, panic, chaos. And I thought, there's no point going through my stuff because I just need to address this. I need to address her, you know, and try and build on where she's at. And I said, before we begin, any questions do you want to ask me? And she said, I want to come and see him. I need to see him. Mm-hmm. I said, of course you can. I said, he's yours. And I will prove this to you throughout that he's yours. I'm here to facilitate anything that you want to do. And I'm going to say a few things now which might upset you, or you might think, what? But I have a responsibility to do so, and hopefully they might help you. And I said to her, if you want to come to the mortuary and actually help prepare him, you can do. And she said, am I allowed to? I said, of course you are. He's yours. And it was amazing to see, like, bang, how her anxiety, like that chaos, it went, because she had the control again. And actually, to move the story on, she came and I showed her the mortuary space. I had a cup of tea with her, showed her the mortuary space, and she was like, oh, okay, wow, this is a mortuary. And then I said, go back down now to the reception for a cup of tea. And then we went back up again. And the next time we went up there, candles had been lit. We were playing Queen, their favourite songs of Queen, not too loudly, but just to take the silence off. And he had been placed in the mortuary. And I'll never forget that she said, I was the first person to put his socks on, and now I'll be the last. Oh, wow. And I remember thinking, like, this is it.
This is how we heal. This is how we help people truly. And it's like control was given back to her for her son. And that went on actually in different forms of her involvement and connection points, as I call them. Like she even helped screw the coffin lid down. And it was beautiful. Some people watching this who have never gone through loss, they might think that's barbaric or that's traumatizing alone, screwing the lid of a coffin down. Totally the opposite. It was beautiful.
Yeah, I can believe that.
And how you measure that, I don't know how to do that, but I wish we could measure it and bottle it up and show people, because that is how we move forward. And it's wonderful. These two worlds, if we can bring them together, great things are going to happen. So how can end-of-life doula model contribute to wider changes in how our society views death? Not just as an ending, but potentially as a moment of meaning and connection.
Another great big question. I think it's a little bit about what I was saying before about us trying to work our way out of a job. I think we are contributing. We're a small part of hopefully demedicalising death, and that isn't to say that there isn't a very important and needed medical component to end-of-life support, but it is just one part of what people need. And I think helping bring that knowledge back into communities where it used to be, giving away, we don't hold on to this knowledge and say it's the realm of experts. We want to share it. We want ordinary people to have it. I think that starts everywhere, really. It might need doulas to kick off the conversations, but it needs schools, it needs workplaces, it needs us all to be better at talking about death and dying, to not run away when the topic comes up. And I think it's because we're so closely aligned with the compassionate communities movement I spoke about. So we do actually at the minute work closely with Compassionate Communities UK, and that is because it's all very well doing and it is important work doing the directly supporting people who are dying, but it's just one part of what doulas do. I think we're aiming for really quite a big ambitious aim of helping communities in general just get better at doing this themselves, so we can just be another member of the community.
I love that, to actually put yourselves out of a job.
Yeah.
That's great.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Do you think we used to have it in society, that community? Was it there before? And if so, how we lost that in our communities?
Yeah, people often talk about, I know when we do talks about what doulas are, we often explain it and say, if you went back 100, even 80 years, then most people would have died in the home. Most people would have seen a person die in the home, including children. They would have seen a dead body. They would have had that knowledge of what's normal. There'd be someone down the road, like an elder kind of person you would call on, same you would with a birth. You've done this before. Can you come and help us? I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, because obviously the way people die is different now. So if you went back that many years, there was more acute diseases. People would often be well and then be very unwell and then die quite quickly. But the reasons and conditions people die of now, it's much more common for people to live for a prolonged period of time with multiple health conditions towards the end of life, more things like dementia. So I do think the whole picture is different, and we're not saying we just want to go back to how it was, because the medical advancements around that are a great thing. But it also means that we have kind of handed over death and dying to professionals, both hospitals and funeral directors. So that's why the work you're doing is so great, because I love what you said about they're yours, because it can really feel like if your person is in the hospital or elsewhere, that they're not anymore, that you haven't got that choice. So I think if we can be part of changing that conversation, that's great.
So you mentioned children there, and in your opinion, what role should education, in particular with schools, play in preparing people to face death, dying and grief with greater compassion and resilience?
Quick answer, a big one.
Yeah.
Longer answer, I think children are so much better at doing death and dying than we give them credit for, and somewhere along the line we help them unlearn that, and we teach them that it's taboo and it's something that we should hush up around. And because when I've worked with children, certainly they ask questions when they want the answers and when they're ready to have the answers, and they talk very frankly about death and dying, like we all should really. And I think we can learn a lot from that. And it makes me think of an example local to me. We have like a community garden that we all tend to, and one day we were clearing out the garage and there were some mice in there, but one of the mice had died. And understandably, like I guess people often do with pets, their parents were sort of like, oh, quick, put that away so they don't see. But they were curious and they'd already seen it, and they asked me, has it died? And I checked with the parents that I could talk to them about it, and I said, yeah, it's died. And to start with, they were quite scared of that, and they were like, oh no, I don't want to go near it, it's dead. And then they came over and they said, well, can I have a look at it? And I said, yeah, of course. And they looked and they said, oh wow, it looks like it's asleep. And I said, yeah, it is, but it's died. And they asked, how might it have died? And then at the end of all of that, they were like, well, what do we do with it now? And I said, well, what do you want to do with it? And they said they wanted to bury it under a tree. And, we hadn't told them that. They just knew that there was some ritual there that they needed to do. And they, want this group of children, can I dig the hole? Can I put him in? Should we say something? And they said something. I didn't do any of that. They just knew what to do. And I think it's a real shame that, like I say, along the line somewhere, we lose that and we stop being so comfortable about it. And a big part of that, I know people mean well. We were talking before we started recording about protecting children, and I think it does come from love and protection that we keep them away from it, but it's unhelpful. And I think if we can start in schools, and if we can take those opportunities, sad, but they are opportunities, to strengthen the skills that children already have. When a pet dies, let's not replace it with the same coloured hamster. Let's instead ask them what they want to do. Would they like to be part of saying goodbye to it? I think that's absolutely where we start to deal with the problem we have at the minute, where we have all these adults who aren't good at talking about it.
Yeah, well, hopefully the campaign to add death, dying, bereavement into the national curriculum, we should have more information and hopefully positive answers very soon. And also, you mentioned the word ritual there. So there's two parts to this. There is dying and having that calmness and control to that point. But then afterwards, with ritual in saying goodbye, I'm not suggesting ritual is having a black hearse and a posh coffin. Quite the opposite. But having contact and connection, I think, forms part of ritual, being with your person. What's your view now on unattended direct cremation, the rise of sort of that clinical approach, which we see in dying, the clinical way of dying, is now moved into death and ritual or non-ritual.
Yeah. And
that's now 20% in the UK. We had the head of funerals, Lee Bevan, on here recently, and he says that co-op funeral care are now seeing just over 30% of their funerals as unattended direct cremation. When I spoke in Vietnam at the Australian Funeral Association, as a nation, they are now at 33% of funerals are unattended. And that's not having a service first, because that's what people say is, oh, they want to have a funeral service. They can still have a memorial service afterwards. It's currently at 27% of people who have a unattended direct cremation in the UK. Only 27% of people are having a memorial service afterwards, which again, I think is quite, I don't want to say alarming, because that's my opinion, but as we move into this clinical way again as a society, what's your view on this?
I think it's another symptom of a death and grief phobic society, really, and I understand, and I've got personal experience of this. So my granddad chose to have a direct cremation, and we obviously went along with that because he wrote down what he wanted, but he put on it afterwards, instead go on the moors in the Peak District and do something as a family there. So we still had that ritual. We went up there, we all read a poem, we walked his favourite walk, we took his ashes there, and that was so needed. So I don't necessarily think that the direct cremation is the problem. But like you say, the framing of it as the solution, you know, it's quick, it's done, you don't need to have a funeral kind of thing, and then not letting people know the importance and how helpful that ritual is for grief. Because a bit like we were saying about rushing somebody away just when they've died, you absolutely need that space. And again, we're not talking about religious ritual or black hearse, like you say. We're talking about grief having something to do, having something to mark that as a meaningful event and moment. So I'm not a fan at all of how some companies have been, you know, putting on the TV around direct cremation and not framing it as, oh, this will be so much easier for your family. Do you want to give them something else to do, kind of thing? You know, make people feel bad and make them choose that, when actually, as you will know better than me, those things, funerals and rituals, are for the people left behind. It's for their grief. It's for them to have some way of honouring somebody. And I think as humans, we really need that. I think I spoke to a researcher recently who was researching ritual and non-religious ritual, and she was talking about how a lot of our rituals in society have come from religions originally, but as we in many areas become more of a secular society, then we're losing the ritual and we're not replacing it with something else. So I think when you say to people, and when as doulas we suggest ritual to families, particularly when you're working with, you know, the classic very stoic British family, they think, oh no, you know, we don't need to do that, we'll just do the practical stuff and we'll not get into any of that. But actually you do need to do that, and you don't necessarily need to plan it, just do what feels right to you in the moment. But I would really hope that people who are choosing direct cremation are choosing it, like I said, it was helpful for us as a family, but it was because we just went and did our own thing. So I think as long as people are still doing something, it's okay. But I imagine in the majority of cases, they don't know that they can do that.
And back to the mother I told you about, again, obviously that was a young person who died dramatically, but the acts that she did, how it's helped her, imagine if that wasn't there for her.
Yeah.
That scares me, the thought of not being given that choice or that control. And even though people now who are selecting it are usually a lot older, like your grandfather, I don't know, it worries me. Are people aware of what they're missing?
Yes.
That's what it is.
And I don't think people know how important and how helpful it is, because you might think at the time, you know, it's a very overwhelming time, more admin can feel just too much. So I think when you're freshly grieving, you can think, okay, not having to think about a funeral, that's going to be easier. But long term, I really don't think it is. I think having that to look back on and feeling that you did something that felt right to honour them is actually really comforting.
Thank you. So people who are watching this or listening to this who are suffering from different types of grief, what gentle advice would you offer them from the experience that you've had at bedsides of people?
I think some of it's probably the classic, slightly cliche stuff that to really recognise in yourself with your own grief, as you say, anticipatorily before the person's died, that grief is a full spectrum of human emotion. You know, I think people are much better at accepting when they picture grief, they think, oh, it's crying, when actually often it's anger, it's numbness, it's things that feel a little bit more stigma around them, that we can't say that we feel angry, particularly some kinds of traumatic death. You know, you mentioned suicide. I think it's a really common example where people are left with anger, and that's completely normal, and people should be able to voice that just as much as saying I feel sad. I think those emotions come in waves, so it's very normal to feel like you're kind of, again, to use your phrase, sort of have lost control a bit, but it's really normal to feel one thing 5 minutes, to be laughing and happy the next. People can feel very guilty for feeling happy, but I know when I've been grieving, I've often thought, aren't brains clever that they almost seem to like drip feed the overwhelm through to you? Yeah. Like you know, maybe have an hour where it feels overwhelming, and then it changes, and then you come back to it, and it's like you process it in lots of little bits, really. But practically, I know we see it often as doulas that when people are often, you know, the family are caring for somebody, and circles of support can get smaller and smaller and they can disappear. And I'm definitely not putting the blame on the people who are caring, because I'm not saying, oh, it's all on you to reach out. But if the help is being offered, say yes to the help. Don't feel like you're a burden. People want to help you. Even if you think, you know what, we're doing fine, still say yes to it, because you want that extra headspace. You don't know what's going to happen. You might have a day where you're completely overwhelmed. And having that, we definitely see as doulas, you know, the bigger the circle of support, the more people you can pull in around you, the better it is for everybody. So say yes to that. And also remember and be kind to yourself that I do think dying is often harder for the people watching it. So if you feel comfortable, learn what that process is going to look like and what it means. It's very easy to misinterpret symptoms, if you like, of ordinary dying. Those narratives I was talking about, it's really common for people to say, oh, well, you know, my mum at the end, she was choking, she was, you know, when actually these are all normal sounds, and we know that isn't what it means. It doesn't mean people are distressed. So you can really do yourself a favour in terms of your own grief and how you look back at that event, because you are going to go over and over it in your head to empower yourself. And I'm going to do a little plug again for Catherine Mannix, who has an amazing video, Dying for Beginners, talks you through all the symptoms, something I always show to people I'm supporting. Watch that if you feel comfortable, and bring the support in around you. And one more thing, not just advice to those people, but to the people who don't know what to say. I think the saddest part of my role, when people say, oh, isn't that miserable? No, most of it is not miserable, it's uplifting. But what I do find sad, that makes me cry when I think about it sometimes, is the times when I've been supporting somebody and they felt utterly alone. You know, my friends have stopped texting me back. My neighbour used to pop over all the time. They don't come over anymore because they don't know what to say. And then you get to the funeral and it's standing room only, and everyone's talking about what a valued friend they were. And I think they didn't know that. They were really alone. They thought everybody had given up on them. So if you are just not knowing if you don't know what to say, just say that. Say, I don't know what to say, but I want to be there for you.
Yeah,
so people,
show up.
Exactly. Show up. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great advice. So finally, what gives you hope about the way death and grief are evolving in society? And how do you see your work contributing to that change and space?
I think contributing is the key word again there, because I think we're doing one little bit and we need everyone else to do their bit too.
Great,
One thing that gives me a lot of hope is a really recent thing, actually. If we'd been doing this recording a month ago, I wouldn't have had as much hope. But obviously there's a lot of discussion right now with the... it's come off the back of the assisted dying bill, really, but there's been 2 commissions set up through parliamentary groups to look at kind of the state of end-of-life care and palliative care in the UK. And off the back of that, a group of organisations, including our own, End of Life Doula UK, have come together around this national end-of-life care coalition. And it's around come out of a frustration, really, that we do feel like a lot of the conversation is focusing on that 5% that is the palliative care, it's the medical services, which again is a very important, needed part, but it's a tiny part compared to the rest, which is the death and dying that happens in a community. And that gives me hope, because I think that people are noticing that death and dying is primarily a social event with a medical component, not the other way around, as Professor Alan Kelleher talks about.
Yeah.
And that the majority of death, dying, loss, caregiving happens away from services. And this is not me saying that we shouldn't better fund services, because I think we definitely should, but that is not the answer. You know, you'll often have these commissions that the outcome is that we need more funding for hospices and palliative care. We absolutely do, but that is not the only thing that needs to happen. Alongside that, we need to strengthen what communities already have, that support that's already there, that just needs a bit of a boost to make those networks stronger. Yeah. So I think that it feels, even compared to a month ago, that the conversation's moving in the right direction. So that's hopeful.
And that's different people, different organisations, groups. It's like a community of supporters to feed into the community of people, really, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating to learn more about what you do and the important role that End of Life Doula UK has in society. I think overall, bigger picture. Like you say, it's contributing, but I think it's quite a big and important piece of work that we need. We need it now more than ever. So thank you so much for coming on, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Emma.